Hello everyone, hopefully you've had a great week so far and we are going to try to make it a little bit better here at Token City. Today with us is Nadine Wilke, having been in charge of various responsibilities and different industries. Nadine is an expert in operations as well as business, product and strategy development. She's now the co-founder and chief growth officer at Particula, which is pioneering the first data and rating platform for tokenized assets. Particula is developing quality ratings in real time and in-depth asset reports that focus on compliance and security, making the digital asset market more accessible and easier to understand for professional investors. Hi Nadine, and welcome to the show.
Hi, thank you for having me.
We recently met at Token Future, an event that you organized, which was a fantastic event in Frankfurt. So we are very happy to have you here today. And let's go ahead with the first question, which is about your current company, Particula. Particula is novel yet old concept. So it would be great if you could tell our audience what Particula is and what is the rationale behind the company.
Yeah, so maybe I start a little bit with my journey. We started, me with my co-founders in 2022, and back then we figured that the market of tokenization has a lot of gaps, flaws, and institutional investors are kind of like not interested in investing in the space back then. I mean, this is slightly changing the last few months, in my opinion. And back then, when we talked to them, the things they feedbacked us why they are, are kept away from the market is that they said, hey, the regulatory uncertainty is making us nervous. Security concerns. I mean, it was back then FTX was not that far away, and then also, of course, they said the market is still not really transparent. So they said the data asymmetry in the market is huge. We don't know who's out there, how do they do it, and what is actually high quality. So we tried to understand the market back then and said, okay, we have to kind of like starting with structuring it, and then we started with the data platform. So we aggregated extensively data on issuer, token, and underlying asset level. We aggregated around 300 data points per asset, and really figured out how are these assets issued, who are the issuers, what makes them different from each other, and really make them comparable with each other for the first time. And besides that, we created a rating framework, which you mentioned, which is considering all 300 aspects, and of course, every aspect or attribute, so to say, which goes into the rating score has different weights. There are also different risk clusters, and for instance, just to show a little bit how complex this framework is, when we're looking at one attribute, for instance, the token holder rights, we have 40 sub-questions only to classify this one attribute. And yeah, for 300, you can imagine how complex it is. But we structured it in a programmatic way, so we can, or that's how we automate it. So it's built like a questionnaire, so it's computer readable, and we also hired the former head of AI from IBM here in Germany, who is training our own machine learning and integrating that into the rating as well to make it more intelligent, more dynamic, and more real time, so to say.
Understood. Wow, very impressive description. Yeah. Going forward a little bit, as you just mentioned, one of the things that Particula does in its holistic approach is using what you just mentioned for tokenized asset standardization and categorization. So just if you could explain to us a little bit the link between this push for standard nomenclature, so to speak, and asset rating. How do they both link together?
Yeah. So like I said, when we had to at first understand the market, and since were no standards at all, we simply couldn't like create a rating without any kind of like defining what, of course, the market thinks, how it is called, for instance, or what different attributes mean, and just to make an example, because I think it's then easier to understand. When we're talking about digital assets, everybody has a different understanding of this term. So when I ask you, for instance, what do you think what a digital asset is, I probably get a different answer than when I ask somebody else. And I think this is a tricky part, that we have so many different narratives in the market and not really a common understanding of the terms. And this is, I would say, one part of standardization, that we are using the same language or the same terms for the same meaning. And for instance, the digital asset, it's one example. I hear sometimes people think, okay, it's cryptocurrency. Some people say, yeah, digital asset can be like any asset imaginably being digital or digitized as a digital twin, using blockchain, using AI, whatsoever. And for us, when we created the classifications, so we for instance created the PDEX, and we of course did it because we thought the market needs it, but also we need that for our product. And in our PDEX, we actually describe what a digital asset is on different layers, and we are separating it in asset-backed and non-asset-backed on the first level, and then going down to, for instance, one on the non-asset back, we're talking about native digital assets like payment tokens, NFTs, or crypto assets. And on the other side, we call them, so say, analog assets, where we separate also in native digital assets, but more asset-backed, of course, tokenized assets and payment tokens like CBDC, for instance. And we, as Particula, focusing only on the native digital assets, which are asset-backed, and the tokenized assets. And then it goes down. So I can recommend everybody, because it's highly complex. We have on our website a graphic where you can see the whole hierarchy, so to say. But we needed that in order to really classify the tokens. Oh, I'm making a thumb. To really classify the tokens and then run our rating framework with it. Yeah, so that's one thing. The other standardization we are working on, we, for instance, are talking to the DTIF right now. They created unique token identifier, because the problem in the markets sometimes is that you cannot uniquely identify the tokens. So when we talk about, for instance, tokenized carbon credits, we have in our data platform 12 carbon credits, which are from 12 different issuers, which are called carbon tokens. So they have the same name, so you don't know, okay, who belongs to which issuer, and you cannot distinguish them. So you need a unique identifier to really identify them, as we know from the traditional finance space. And I think it's really, really important when we are establishing this, I would say, new capital market, that we are also using the mechanism from the traditional world, which are useful in terms of security and investor protection, and, you know, put it onto the new market, like the identifiers or classifications and so on. Yeah, I could say so.
Yeah, I can tell. Fantastic. That's fantastic. A couple comments that came to mind. Actually, I did have a misunderstanding with another guest one time when he mentioned digital assets, and we were actually referring to different things, right? Different types of digital assets, right? I was thinking more real-world assets, the tokenized assets, and he was thinking about cryptocurrencies rather, right? So yeah, definitely true. Also, in terms of standardization that you mentioned, we also had on the show John Greaves, also known as Dr. Blockchain, a fantastic person who is extremely well versed in standardization. He mentioned, you know, the myriad of problems that, for example, in terms of supply chain nomenclature standardization, when someone makes a little mistake and suddenly you end up with, you know, 40 trucks instead of 4 or something like that, right? So we're talking finance, but eventually we will talk about many more things, and standardization really is a key part that maybe is not so well known, right? Yeah, well, to continue a little bit, you just told us about all of the things that Particula is doing. Is there anything else that Particula is doing at the moment?
I mean, you mentioned already our event we're doing, which we did. So we're really also working hard, especially here in Europe, to be thought leaders and to establish such events where we can spread more education. Because, for instance, I'm talking to a lot of banks and asset managers, especially who don't have exposure yet to the digital asset world, so to say, and often I get the questions, yeah, we need business cases, or what could we do, and who should we work with? Should we do it internally? Should we do it with an external service provider, and so on and so on. And that's also why I thought, okay, we have to organize this conference in Germany, because people are not aware what they could do. And I mean, we talked on many conferences about the benefits of tokenization, and I think everybody is aware of that. So I think it shouldn't be about talking about what it is. It should be more about, okay, like how can we move forward from the tech stack we have right now and from the regulation which we have right now. And yeah, so this is one thing. Besides that, we are, let me think. So beside the identifier business, the rating business, of course, we have also the data platform, which is mostly public. We are also publishing in 1 month a new version of it, so it will look more like a financial terminal. It is kind of like just our tool which we need, but it's not like our business model. That's why we are making it public. And there you can also see that we are having multiple asset classes. So I think this is also something really interesting. When we started back then, we started in the environmental space. So we looked at carbon credits, biodiversity credits, and so on. There was a lot of traction in 2022, but last year this traction was almost erased. I think we had over 200 issuers on the platform. There are I think 80 left or something like that, because they all went out of business last year. And then we also thought last year, okay, we cannot only focus on environmental assets. So that's why we made our scope bigger last year, and it also included other categories like commodities with precious metals, rare earth, also real assets, where we count the real estate, infrastructure, and land use under that. And the last bucket, and I think this is still and also for the next 1 or 2 years, the biggest one is the financial bucket, so to say. So we have fixed income, private equity, and other equities, which is the most traction on at the moment, especially in fixed income with the treasury bills, the money market funds. And then beside these big ones I mentioned, we have miscellaneous buckets where we put everything in, which is kind of like more collectibles, more retail focused. And there I see a trend in tokenized diamonds and what did I say, whiskey, and yeah, other stuff like watches, and yeah, but mostly tokenized diamonds actually, which I thought is quite interesting. Yeah, so this is what we also offer, and in future, let's see, we can actually do a lot with the base of data and ratings. There are a lot of products which we could do or we might don't do. So let's see what future brings.
Great. To stay in the standardization conversation that I mentioned previously, you did mention the Digital Token Identifier Foundation, which is kind of doing an overlapping work with part of what Particula is doing. So I wonder how you see the landscape in terms of your organization, the Digital Token Identifier Foundation, going forward. How do you see the work of both institutions playing out?
Yeah. Maybe to get a little bit back, so this year, and it's just signed. We overtook an association here in Germany, which was basically the first, and I think 2017 they started creating unique identifier, but not only the identifier for all kinds of tokens, actually, not only tokenized assets, but also every digital asset. It has to be a token. And besides the identifier, they also created the ICT, which is also a classification framework. So they were the kind of like the first who created an extensive framework to classify tokens and connecting it with an identifier. And they also had a so-called token base. It was also a database where you can like search for the token, kind of like a registry. So we overtook them. It's not like public yet, but we will make it public soon, officially. And what we did is, or what the problem was, the identifier they created, unfortunately, wasn't really adapted by many because they didn't. It was just not known. And when you do something like that, you have to lobby a lot, so it gets adjusted from the market, so to say. And the DTIF came around, I think also 1.5 years ago now, and they have done a pretty good job, and they are actually also mentioned in the MiCA papers. So we already know that the DTIF here in Europe will be probably the identifier standard, and then we thought, okay, why should we push a second identifier if we could like just work with them together? So that's why we said, okay, hey, they are also a non-profit organization, so they have, of course, it's not easy for the DTIF to handle that. So we said, okay, let's work together, let's find a way. And also what they also don't have is this classification framework. So we said, okay, let's use your identifier and our classification, connect that, and also in future integrate the ratings as well and metadata as well. So then you have kind of like an infrastructure of the data value chain, so to say. And I think that's all about collaboration, and this is, I think, the most important thing for standardization for the market. So that's why we are like so focused on it to do it, because it's of course helping us for our business, but also the whole market.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely a big synergy there with the Digital Token Identifier Foundation. Now, I would like to go to another subject a little bit. One of the things you do is risk analysis, and this is something that has been done for a long time in business, right? How risky is this business proposition, this investment proposal? So what would you say makes the difference between on-chain asset risk analysis and traditional risk analysis?
Yeah. This in general. So, for instance, when we are talking to the big credit rating agencies, what we do, so we are pretty aware what they are doing and focusing on. A credit rating is, of course, different than what we are doing. If we would want to do credit rating, we need to get a license for that. But we actually said, okay, we don't want that. We also don't want to be right now a credit rating agency. Maybe we are turning to one in future, but now we stay like that. And what we noticed that most cases when we are talking about, okay, we have a tokenized bond, for instance, and then there is a Moody's rating, then of course we are integrating that as well and looking, okay, there's already rating of the underlying, but still there are questions and risk involvements about the issuer, when the issuer is a startup, for instance, because a startup can in most cases not afford a Moody's rating, and also the token level, of course, which often has the technical infrastructure behind that, and also evolved risks which are coming that. So the frameworks from the classical credit rating industry is not made for doing such an assessment, because infrastructure was for them never never a thing, but now they also recognize that they have to change this. And what Moody's but also S&P did was a stable coin assessment. You can also find that on their websites, which was quite interesting. But they're also not really like, I know they just did it, but of course for them it's harder compared to us what we are doing. They can, for instance, not automate their whole process of the assessment. So for them, in terms of and also, of course, since it's such big entities, they cannot move that fast. So we have an advantage there. And then, like I said, we see ourselves more complementary to them. And for some asset classes and products, it makes sense to, for instance, work together. And for others, it doesn't, because they are not in that. For instance, the whole alternative asset space, they are not in that. So this is kind of like a big gap. And also they said, okay, it's depending how much the volume of the asset is. So is it not big enough for them, then of course they don't do it. So we have like a lot of gaps there which we can close, and where we can like work together, we're working together. So this is kind of like this distinguished between us.
Nadine, in a couple of short instances, the communication failed a little bit. Just for you to know, I don't know if there's something you can tweak on your end to make sure that you are as audible as possible. But other than that, the message was perfectly clear. Huh? It was just 2 short instances. Okay. So I'm curious. I love everything you're telling us about Particula, and I'm curious what chains you support. And in that sense, do you see more activity in one chain than another? Would you highlight any particularities between chains? What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so in general, I can say that when we are at institutional products like Franklin Templeton or even JP Morgan, for instance, and so on, they're all still mostly in closed ecosystems and also more on private chains than public ones. But I also see that some moving also on public ones. For instance, I think Franklin Templeton also offering it now on Stellar as well. And of course, we all know the BUIDL token by BlackRock, which is on Ethereum. And this is, I think, the trend, what I'm also seeing. So I don't see like smaller chains getting used by the big players. I see more established big networks which are being used when public, but also they're pretty hesitant with public chains. So it can still be a few years until the adoption will rise. And then I mostly see more like EVMs getting used over, like, I don't know, I've never seen someone building on Solana for
Well, unfortunately, we lost our guest there. She was telling us about the different options with chains that Particula is working for. We're very sorry about that. We will have to leave it there. We hope you enjoyed everything that was said. Very interesting project. Thank you so much for being with us. Take care and bye-bye.